Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Benson, and I serve as the president of the Alabama chapter of the Voice Foundation. I am an associate professor of music theater voice at Auburn University in Alabama, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our first chapter meeting of 2024. I have just a few announcements here at the beginning, and then I will very quickly turn it over to our fantastic guest speaker who is joining us today. First and foremost, I wanted to introduce you to the newly elected leadership team, although there are some familiar faces of folks continuing in their same roles as in the previous election cycle. But we are super duper excited to welcome a new position and new member of the chapter council, Chloe McWhorter, serving as student liaison to the chapter council. So big welcome to Chloe, and a big thank you to all of the folks who are going to continue to volunteer their time in service of this chapter and all of our core values, and to connect us through our chapter meetings and to continue to work to build community around our mutual interest in the voice in Alabama. So thank you and welcome. I wanted to let you know that our next meeting will be on a Sunday in April. We have not set the date yet, which is why I can't tell you the explicit date, but as soon as we do, we will get it out to you via social media or direct email. If you would like to be if you haven't been, but you would like to be receiving more information, your attendance at this meeting will cause our director of membership to reach out to you and ask if you would like to be included on our mailing list and receive future information about the activities in our chapter. So you don't need to do anything other than perhaps respond to that email if you find yourself receiving it. But I want to say a big welcome to everybody who's here. I know there are folks from within our state and from beyond, and we're so happy that you're here. This is a free meeting that we offer to anybody who would like to participate. Our meetings are usually online, and we'd like to make all the information accessible to all. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to Marina Gilman, who will be leading us through the role of the Feldenkrais method in voice training for habilitation and rehabilitation. We're super duper excited. Marina has a fabulous bio here that you can read, but it's most important to note that she is a licensed speech language pathologist, singing teacher, and performer. And so this is a wonderful example of the representation of all of our interests here in the Voice Foundation, and a really excellent guest speaker. She's also formerly from our region, so she spent some time at the Emory Voice Center, and so we're excited to welcome her back. She also has a book. So if your interest today is piqued and you are interested, it's published by Plural and available on Plural's website and on Amazon, I saw when I was looking myself, Body and Voice Somatic Education. So if you'd like to hear more, you can pursue the book. So today, the plan is that we will briefly hear about the basic science-informed principles of the Feldenkrais method, and then there will be an interactive component, several short verbally directed awareness through movement lessons, and these are applicable to both habilitative and rehabilitative voice training. That is the end of my slideshow. I'm going to pause right there. Just as your questions may come up during the presentation, during the PowerPoint component, if you would just put your questions into the chat, that would be great. And then we can look at those at the end of the PowerPoint component. During the interactive component, we have a small enough group that it's fine for you to just go ahead and unmute and ask your question. If that makes you nervous or uncomfortable, you are absolutely welcome to put it into the chat, which I will be monitoring, and I can ask the question on your behalf. So you have lots and lots of options there. So without further ado, welcome to Marina Gilman.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being having the opportunity to talk to you all. And just for my information, how many people have, can you unpin me for just a minute? How many people have any experience with the Feldenkrais method or any of the other somatic methods? Okay, so Feldenkrais specifically? No. Yes, one or two. Okay. All right, that's good. So I'm not going to bore you too much with repetition. All right, great. You can pin me. So what what I'm going to do is share my screen for a brief discussion of what is Feldenkrais and who and what he did and who he is and so on. Share. There we go. Okay. Play from the start. Here we go. All right, that's me. So what Feldenkrais was a very interesting man. He, from the very beginning of his, he went as a 13-year-old from what is now Ukraine to Israel on his own, joining a group of immigrants. This was just after the Balfour Declaration and the establishment of Palestine. And he ended up becoming a well-known physicist, and he did his in engineering and physicist at the Sorbonne in Paris. And at that point, as a young man, sort of in Palestine at that time, he and a group of his friends actually taught themselves jujitsu, as an early form, and very much interested, ended up then being one of the first black belts in judo, studying with Jiro Kano in Paris, who was one of the developers of judo, and taught that for many, many, many years. And then he had personal experiences with personal injuries where all of a sudden things were happening that he didn't understand. He severely injured his knee, was laid up for months. It was a soccer accident, one of those freak things where he dislocated the knee and the meniscus. And then as it was healing, then he also then injured the other leg. And he was convinced that he was going to not be able to walk ever again. But he got up and was shocked to find that the injured knee, the original right knee, was behaving like a normal knee. And it completely freaked him out. So it was suddenly bearing weight, where for months and months and months, it hadn't been able to bear weight. And he was so, shocked and horrified by this that he actually refused to talk about it for years. I mean, he just thought he was going absolutely nuts, and this couldn't possibly happen because an injury is an injury is an injury. But then gradually began, as he reached out to other medical people and to, that this does happen. And he began to realize that the whole mind-body connection, that there was something going on in the brain that really impacted everything else. And that is the kind of underlying basis for his method. And talking about the body map and our understanding of the body. And because he was a quintessential scientist, that's, what he did. Everything is, and I'll talk about that a little bit more coherently in a minute. So with that background, so that there is the actual study of science and meeting the scientists. This is in the early days in the sort of 30s and 40s, in the early days of neuroscience. He actually was working and colleagues with many of the people who are developing. And what has happened now since that time, he died in 1984, modern neuroscience has actually caught up with his beliefs. And so many of the things that he thought and practiced and talked about in terms of his method have now actually been validated scientifically, and which I find very exciting. One of them is that one of the principles of the method is that you can think about it, you can imagine doing movements without doing them and still affect change. And that's something that people have kind of said, yeah, sure, right? Except recently in 2023, there is a study that went to actually look at redo the Penfield's homunculus study. And Penfield in the 1930s was working with people with brain damage, and he actually went in and put probes in and with the science of the time to map the cortex and show the motor cortex, where in the brain and what was stimulated what. And that's, you get this funny man with the big lips and the big tongue and so on. And a recent study replicated that using modern technology and MRI. And what they discovered is 2 new areas in the cortex, motor cortex, that only sparked when people were just imagining the movement. And that these areas interact with each other, and they interact with other parts of the whole cortex, both motor and sensory. So again, validating a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. So we're all singers. We all are working with people with voice and voice disorders. And it's an internal process, right? Something happens, you want to teach, you want to do, and it's my whole experience, even just talking, is really about internalizing what's going on. I feel, I can't. If I played the flute, which I used to, there's a certain part of it where they would play with the fingers, or a violin or something. There's some external portion of it. With our instrument that we use for daily life, it is all internal. And the problem is that when we teach this external project, when we teach this external process, we teach it from the outside in. So I'm using my voice to tell you what you ought to do, but I'm using verbal instruction, suggesting, modeling, and images, and sometimes even touch. But that's outside, and you, as the patient or the student, are processing it internally. So I have a body map. Let's see, how is this going to work? Yes. So I have a body map that is, let's go here. Let's go. Wait a minute, where am I? Sorry. There we go. Yep. Okay. And our body map is formed through our lifetime. So if we're somebody who comes from a household that is shut up and be quiet and never say a word, our whole being with breath and voice and so on is going to be very different from somebody growing up in a household that it's, yelling and screaming and talking and doing other things. So it's not only that, but it's the way we move, right? If somebody is injured, and one of the biggest examples, the best examples that I have, is somebody, I worked with a young high school kid many, many years ago, teaching singing, and she never opened her mouth. Right? And it's like, okay, what's going on? Why can't she open her mouth? And I said, well, where is the opening? Where is the hinge for the jaw? And she went, and in that moment is, why did she go here first? Right? And the reason she went here first was that, being a high school kid and having her teeth done, she wore braces. And with the braces came the rubber bands. So this is where, over the time of wearing the braces, her body map of how to open her mouth had shifted. And so even though the braces were long gone, that was still part of how she did it. Intellectually, she knew that this was the actual joint. So then the challenge was to help her change that inner image back to the joint being here from being there, right? And this can happen with, any part of the body. So, as we visualize, we sense, we feel, and we move as a whole body activity, but also in relationship to how this map functions. So if you've worn a corset for years and years and years, then your relationship to your rib cage is not going to be differentiated. It's going to be a whole body thing. And so that's going to affect the way you learn to breathe and move, right? Everything's going to be very stiff. Now, as teachers and as therapists, we are teaching from the perspective of our body map, right? So we know where the voice is, we know the anatomy, we know the physiology, but the images that we use are the images that really come from our own personal experience. And so that's something we need to kind of be aware of when somebody says, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? And so, it's keeping that in mind. And that is the sort of one of the essentials to what Feldenkrais was really all about. So over time, we use these movements become habitual, they become habituated, and people say it's natural. I've always done it that way. This is the way God meant it to be. No, 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 no. We learned it, and it's become so ingrained that we don't think about it, right? So that, and especially so in teaching any kind of somatic body thing, we're really always up against that this is natural, this is the way it's always it is. But it's our challenge then, and especially when there are maladaptive patterns that have come about, for especially in the therapy end of things where people have gotten into a rut. And even with, students, young students coming in and wanting to sing, they try to imitate, they try to do something, and then it just doesn't quite work. So our challenge is to help them reframe that body map. And this is where the Feldenkrais method is so important. Because it may be natural, it may be feel, but it's habituated. And therefore, most of the time we can do something that's changeable. So I love this quote from Marjorie Barstow, who was one of Alexander's prime students. Why am I always trying to be right when I don't know what right feels like? Which is just, I mean, how many times have we as individuals come across that? Somebody says, do X, and what is right? I said, I have no idea. I don't know what I'm doing, right? So the question from the therapist and the teacher is, how can I facilitate the student's internal process to discover these new pathways? That's our job, right? And Feldenkrais said, if we do not know what we are actually enacting, then we cannot possibly do what we want to do. So again, it's this, there are two parts to the method. One is the awareness through movement, which are verbally directed lessons, which we're going to explore in a few minutes. And the other one is a hands-on, what he calls functional integration, which is the client, usually on a table, either lying down or sitting, where it's manual manipulation, but the information imparted is the same, is what is going on within the system, and with an aware and bringing some awareness of that process, and facilitating changes, not by making you do, but doing it slowly enough that the body can find the new pathways. So somatic learning is the result of a nervous system's ability to automatically determine the optimal movement pathways at the moment, sharpening proprioceptive and other perceptual skills. The nervous system here is the brain, and all of that, comes. Feldenkrais would talk about the nervous system, but I think today we would actually, call it what it is, which is the brain. And it's experiential, it's non-judgmental. There is no right or wrong. It's, what do you experience? How do you experience when you're doing these things? And then being able to be, through the attention to the quality of the movement, the sense of strain, of ease, all of those things, in a non-judgmental way. There is no, this is right, this is wrong. This is, wow, gee, that's really interesting. I'm really curious about that. Why does that suddenly feel easier? Or why is there suddenly a little glitch there? And maybe if I just go a little bit slower, then my system can figure out what's really going on. And the most important thing is it's not goal-oriented, right? Especially when you're doing these lessons. And as I said before, that it's really based in the science. So for elements of the Feldenkrais method, it's the quality, as I've said, the quality of the movement rather than the goal, and repetition without repetition. That means that you do it again, but you don't do it again the same way. When we think about repetition, it's like, okay, I got to do this 5 times, 3, 4, 5, but I'm not paying any attention to the how, to the quality. I'm just mindlessly doing that. And you see people in the gym doing this kind of thing all the time. In my world, in the Feldenkrais world, it's, I'm doing this, right? Maybe both arms, maybe not, but I'm also paying attention to the quality, which means that allows that every time I do it, it's going to be different, right? And the difference is I may sense it, I may not sense it, but if I go slowly enough, and there's a reason for that neurologically, then, he says, do it several times, but you do it with attention. And then you suddenly allow your body to find new pathways that may or may not be easier. So, the pace and the repetitions is up to the individual. Usually the coaching is go slow. And one of the important things that Feldenkrais did is he understood the anatomy and the physiology well enough that all of the lessons provide constraints, which can, and I'll show you some of these as we go. So some physiological constraints that force the system to find new pathways to work around that part of the body that is constrained. So one of the constraints is a lot of the lessons are lying on the floor. So you're constrained there by the floor, right? Now, if you're lying on your back, then the whole torso is, and then your arms and your legs are free to move. But if you're lying on your side, then you've got the constraint of the one side of the rib cage and the pelvis cannot move as easily, but we can move around those places, right? Chair lessons, you're sitting on your butt. So there are certain things that you can do easier than others. But again, it provides a constraint. And thinking about it in those terms, as you take some of these principles into the studio and start thinking maybe a little differently about how you're working with whether it's in the clinic or is to really sort of think about, okay, this is a constraint. What is it that I want to see to loosen up and to move? And again, the non-judgmental is really important. So allow for the autonomous determination of optimal movement pathways within the movement, which is a word that I love. So the core assumptions and principles is that a movement originates in the brain, not in the skeletal muscular system. Again, this is part of the new science of neuroscience from today. For many years it was body up to the brain. But Feldenkrais recognized, again, through his own personal experience, that an awful lot was going on up there. And that movement in any part of the body affects movement throughout the whole. And that's really, really important. And we're going to do some of that. There's the gross skeletal stuff, but there is then the little tiny internal. So if you think about it as being a movement, it may be tiny, itsy bitsy, but what you do with your feet and your toes, right, and your knees will definitely impact on what happens up here. And again, we don't know what we don't know. And we move according to this individual body map, but we don't always appreciate what that is, right? Just say you have a body map, what is your image, and I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there's some parts of me that are very clear and I can well define. And then there are other things that I move and I don't know that I could define exactly what was going where. But internally, in terms of my brain and the whole cortical understanding, it is there. So in the context of lessons, focusing on how you move, not where or how much. So that differentiates from a lot of other body methods where there is, especially in sport, it's goal-oriented. This is really not goal-oriented at all. And that's why it's kind of hard for people to wrap their brains around that it actually could be useful, but it's amazing how powerful the lessons are. And the attention is both to the foreground, that is the specific direction and action of the movement. So if I say, to lift your shoulder, right? So I'm paying attention to what the lifting and lower the shoulder, and we're going to do that in a few minutes. So I'm noticing that, but then once I get used to doing that, then my attention can widen to the resonance of, well, what's happening into my ribs? What's happening in my rib cage on the one side? What's happening to the rib cage on the other side? And so that then you can begin to expand your attention away from the individual specifics to what is the resonance of that throughout. And again, imagining specific movements Ice skaters, as you know, can't always work on the professional skaters, can't always work on the ice, right? They can't get time. But so that they got really used to training, imagining their moves, imagining what they're doing, right? And so when they do go out on the ice, the body already has a sense of what's going on, right? I mean, I had that personal experience at one point. I was actually working with a cantor who then had a vocal fold hemorrhage just right in the middle of the high holy days. And I ended up, you know, being called in to sing because I've been coaching her with the music. And one of the early solos that I had a high A in it. And it was kind of always one of those moments. And I was kind of rehearsing it while I was waiting for that moment to come. I was just going through that phrase. And all of a sudden, something shifted in the way I imagined that phrase. And it was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so I stopped and I redid it, and the same kind of sensation happened. And then it was time for me to sing. And so I let it loose. And it was something had shifted. And that I could have held it forever. It was easy. It was amazing. And it showed to me the sort of the power of using the imagination just to allow the body to find its own pathways. So use what we can't control and adapt that which we can to control to our advantage. So sometimes we need to do things. If you can't control it, then just let it go, right? And figure out what you have control over, and mostly let it go. So the scientific principles here are, as I've said, again, these are based on his colleagues at the time, and some are obviously much earlier scientific principles. But body image and movement is a function of the central nervous system and a function of the body's brain map. And this was already part of the science. You can look at, these guys, Schilder, Bernstein, Speransky, early 20th century, early to mid. And the internal relationships of the whole, changes in one sphere affect changes in another. Again, that any movement that we do, anything we do at one end is going to have resonance throughout the entire system. And reciprocal innervation refers to the way the activation of one muscle influences the activity of the other. So that's internal relationships changes the sphere. That's really working at the same principle that Sherrington came up with, and realized that, if one muscle is doing something because they're all interconnected, then it's going to influence what's going on elsewhere. So that's the Weber-Fechner law, is the law of just noticeable difference. So here, the idea is that the change in a stimulus will be just noticeable as a constant ratio of the original stimulus. So less is more. The less you do, right? The less you do, the more effect that it actually has. So if I'm forcing, I'm going to be using so much muscle strength that I won't be able to feel and sense the fine subtleties of my movement. But if I allow it to go slower, lighter, easier, gentler, all of those things, that I will actually have a bigger result. And that's a really important factor. The other thing is that the Magnus writing reflex. Magnus, early on, you can see it was 1873 to 1927, watching babies as they developed. And what do? They're lying on their bellies and they want to do something, and they look at the sky, and they look and they look and they look, and lo and behold, the next thing you know, they're on their back. Right? So that the whole point of with infant development, that they're looking up to find the horizon, right? And in that process, their whole body changes. And what he realized was that a lot of things we do with our eyes organize. So if we're staring, and you can all try that right now, is just stare very hard at something and take a moment to kind of feel what happens to your breath. And then widen your vision and see if your breathing changes. And what are we taught as singers? At least I was taught as a singer is, if you're nervous, find a focal point out front and fixate on it. Well, I was really good at that. And, so I was honing in, and then everything just tightened up, right? So, and I did this a number of years ago when I was teaching at Syracuse University. I had a small group of my students come in, and I just had them play with staring and not staring. And it was amazing, the transformation in the sound, right? And especially when somebody clinically is struggling with their voice, they're trying so hard that everything kind of locks in. So if you can get them to kind of open up their visual field, this will also potentially help them open up their vocal field. So there are several ways in which we interfere with our movement. And these are unnecessary, habitual, unconscious movements that replace optimal action. And this is certainly for our patients, but also who are desperately trying to compensate for the fact that their vocal cords are swollen and they've got lumps and bumps and they sound like crap and it's very effortful. But it also is true of just our singing students. They're diversionary, quick movements that replace desired action. So, right? So I'm taking a breath. I don't need to do this. I don't need to lift my shoulders. It's not helping me breathe, right? Or I had one student, and I've seen this a lot, is when they go to sing, the head comes forward, trying to bring your voice out front. And there are lots of these little ticky things that happen, and they kind of replace the desired action. And it's something to watch out for in your students. It's often the quick things we miss, and these I find are really the most important. And Feldenkrais also talks about parasitic movements. These are unnecessarily movements that really don't contribute to the intention at all, right? Raising the eyebrows while singing high notes, or how many times do we, as singing teachers, teach this? I used to do that all the time. What has this got to do with going high? Except it kind of shows somebody who doesn't understand the concept of high notes or low notes. But we could have done just as well. And then there's the unnecessary preparatory. Again, the lifting the shoulders to breathe. People to release tension. They suddenly got all these people wiggling their jaw, and it becomes so habituated that they do it all the time. Visually, it's kind of annoying. But there are all of these funny little gestures. Not everybody, but people have their individual. So as clinicians and as teachers, we need to kind of watch out for these. And then the question is, how do you get rid of it, right? How do you get them to stop doing it? And that's where the fun starts. Okay. So as teachers and clinicians, you want to really watch and feel and embody for yourself what you see, right? Again, we work through our own body map. And so if the student is struggling or the patient is struggling, then try to figure it out within your own self, and it might give you some insight into what to do and how to do it. And tune into the subtleties of movement, especially the quick or the seemingly benign, because they may in fact be at the core of a lot of what the maladaptive behaviors or the behaviors that interfere. So summing up a little bit, so the eyes organize the body. Our body doesn't know what it doesn't know. And so saying something to somebody and they really have no clue, repeating it all the time, it's a matter of helping them find it and to build it in. And that movement in one part of the body resonate through the whole. So something as simple as locking the knees when standing can really lock up the breath. And again, use of the eyes. And then as part of your therapy or your teaching, think about constraints. And we'll talk about this better in a minute. Sometimes just turning it upside down, may feel, oh my God, this is wrong. I don't want to teach bad habits. I've learned it. This is a terrible, awful thing to do. But for some people, turning it on its head may, in fact, be the key to unlocking. I had a student once who, for all the world, had a really dark kind of sound. And at the time, she was in a choir, and the teacher was always saying, "Oh, sing it up here, put it forward, put it forward." And so people kept telling her to put it forward. And the more forward she was told, the more back it went. And just in a moment of total frustration, because I'd been working with her for a while, we didn't get anywhere, I said, "Okay, put it back." And immediately it freed her up, right? It was the image that she needed. So telling her to do what I didn't want her to do actually made her do what I wanted her to do, right? So don't be afraid to let people make ugly noises, because not all ugly noises are bad, right? We know that from the hard metal and all of these awful, to my ears, pop sounds, is they're fine. They're screaming and yelling and making these ugly sounds and making more money than I ever will. And they come off the stage and they're perfectly fine. So they're doing something right. And really learn to see in a non-judgmental way and be curious. So that's that part. I'm going to stop sharing and then I can see you all. Any questions so far? I've kind of gone through this very quickly, but try to give you kind of an overview of what Feldenkrais is all about. Any questions so far? If you could unpin me. There we go. No, it's clear as mud. All right. Okay, so let's leave me unpinned. So what I'd like you to do, there are two lessons that I use a lot in the context of therapy, and again, these are all awareness through movement lessons. In the pure sense of form of the work, these are 45 minutes, sometimes an hour long lessons, mostly on the floor. Not always. There's some chair lessons, there's some standing lessons, that all of them to deal with really working. There are very few lessons that work with a voice, but every single one of them, even though you're not vocalizing, changes how you are functioning and allowing for better singing, right? So, you don't have to make noise to get better at it, which is one of the important things. So what I'd like everybody is just to find a comfortable chair, sit comfortably, maybe a little bit towards the front, and just pay attention to your shoulders and think about the difference between the right shoulder and the left shoulder. And how does it feel? And then slowly, very slowly, begin to lift the right shoulder and bring it down. So lift and lower very slowly. And notice, what does it feel like? Is this easy? And as you bring it up and bring it down, make sure that when you're lowering it, you're really lowering it. Because those of us who are kind of crunched, we don't understand lowering very much. So keep repeating. And as you do, get curious about the trajectory, whether it goes slightly forward, whether it goes straight up towards the ear. And find that easy way of doing it. And notice as you continue doing it, whether the range of motion is just a little bit freer. And, if you think you're doing it slowly, do it even slower. Tune into your breath. Are you breathing with the movement? You're holding your breath and then letting it go. So just stay on the right side. And stop and let it go. And now just relax. And notice if there's any sense of difference between the right and the left shoulder. Are you more aware? Does it feel easier, wider? Check in with your breathing. And now bring your right ear in the direction of your right shoulder and bring it back. And again, sense any sensation, right? And how easy is it? Do you feel strained in your neck? And do less if it's strained. And again, what is the trajectory? Does your head want to turn a little bit? Does it go straight? And remembering that there's no right or wrong. And how straight is that movement? And you really just bring the ear a little closer. Does the head turn? And let that go. And one of the important principles of these awareness through movement lessons is the pauses, because a lot of information gets digested by the body during the pauses. So there is a lot of rest time, and the joke in the community is it's the one professional training where you're allowed to sleep, because sometimes, especially in the longer lessons, that there's so much information that's going in at the body, you just need to kind of check out. And what was always fascinating was there were always, a couple of people that quote unquote slept through the training, but in the end, they came away just as informed as anybody else. So, I mean, there's sleeping and really checking out, there's sleeping and processing. So now combine the two. So bring the right ear towards the right shoulder and the right shoulder towards the right ear. Right, still on the right side. And see if you can move at the same time and come back at the same time. Right, what am I doing? Right. And then as you come back down, make sure you're coming back all the way down. And see if you can start the movement with the head and the shoulder together and end it together. And notice where your attention is going. Are you focusing more on what's happening in the shoulder or what's happening in the neck? And let it to go. And then let it all go. Come back to neutral. And sense anything that comes to your attention. The sense of your right side versus the left side. And within your own individual processing, are there other parts of your body that feel like were affected? Or you can look on the screen at other people who have their screens open and sense, is there any difference between the right side of the face and the left side? Right? Think about breathing. Is it easier to breathe into one side of your rib cage than the other than before? Or there may be something else that's coming into your attention, maybe the way you're sitting. How many people feel a little lopsided? Okay, pretty much everybody that I can see. Good. All right. So any questions so far? Okay.
I had one quick
comment.
question.
Yes.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, Jacob, you can go first.
I just had a comment. Doing this with my eyes open and with my eyes closed, it was
Mhm.
really interesting comparing my experience doing them both ways. I felt like I was better able to track my movements with my eyes closed.
Mhm. Good observation. Good. Okay. Molly, you had a
Well, that's interesting. Jacob's comment is interesting since you said didn't you say something about the eyes helps the body focus or kind of connect? So I think that would led into my question where, I guess you were talking about information from everything we're doing. So I just wanted to kind of clarify. So even if a lot of the information is maybe unconscious, we are not aware of it, the body is still processing all of this information.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And the more, like anything else, the more you do the work, the broader your attention and the more sensitive you become. It's like anything else, right? But yeah, there's an awful lot of processing that goes on. You have no idea, except you walk away from the lesson feeling different, that something has happened,
Okay. That makes
right?
more sense. Yeah.
Right. So any other comments before we even you out? Okay. All right. So open eyes, closed eyes, that's totally independent, but begin to slowly lift and lower the left shoulder. And again, slower. And sense how easy and how smooth that movement is. And do less if you're feeling, you don't have to go anywhere. And find the range of motion that is simple. And notice that if you go beyond it, that you may actually have changed the trajectory of the movement. And follow it with your breathing. And allow your attention to broaden just a little bit to what's happening in your rib cage. And as you make sure that the breathing stays easy. Good. And then let it go. Make sure that shoulder, and check in with the left shoulder. Has anything changed compared left to right? Does something feel a little different? Is there any change in your breathing? And when you're ready, begin to bring your left ear in the direction of your left shoulder. And then back to neutral. And think about your nose being kind of a windshield wiper, so that as you turn to the left, that you're keeping the head forward. Right? It's sometimes we want to turn, but see if you can kind of keep it even. Just think about that as an image. If it doesn't work for you right now, that's okay. The nice thing about these lessons is that there's no wrong. It's all, gee, that's interesting. So we like to think of ourselves as being symmetrical, but we quickly find out that that's not the case. Again, and let that go. And again, sense any change that you have in your neck, your shoulders, your rib cage, your breathing, maybe even the way you're sitting on your chair. And when you're ready, put the two together. So bring your left ear towards your left shoulder and your left shoulder towards your ear. And again, try to coordinate that movement. So the movement begins and ends together, and making sure that when you come back to as neutral a place as you can. So it's allowing the shoulder to maybe move down a little bit more than you thought it could. Good. And once again, think about what's happening in the neck, in the back of the neck, and the spine, and also in your rib cage. And let it go. And sense any differences, the sensation of your shoulders, your neck, your head. And we didn't do any vocalization at the beginning, but just do a little hum. And see if your voice feels a little different. It may not, doesn't matter. Good. Okay. Any questions? Comments, thoughts?
So interesting. When I started on the right side, I thought the right was so much tighter than the left. And then when I got to the left, it was like, holy moly, what's going on over here? And it took me back to times where Marina would, which it's gonna be a question of mine, what that was all about. She would just walk up behind me and gently put her finger in a place on my back or shoulders. And all of a sudden, everything like changed. So could you come do that now, please?
Give
Oh,
it time.
I don't know
Give
what
it
happened.
time. Give it time. I mean, I love this. This is a part of a much longer lesson, but I love this piece of it because it does affect such change. And especially as somebody comes in and they're all kind of, tense, and we carry a lot of tension in our head and our neck. You don't need many repetitions just to begin to unlock, right? And sometimes to take it again, if you've done it a few times without making any sound, but then to potentially add voicing to it, doing a few repetitions with adding voice to see what happens when, and we can, well, I don't want to try that right now. I'll just throw that out too, because I want to do something else. But there were lots of ways of playing with these things. And I've had people, I've worked with people. I just met somebody the other day that I'd worked with years ago and said, oh my God, I really love the shoulder lifting and lowering. It just makes such a difference because it's so easy. You can do it anywhere, right? That's the thing. You don't need to have a mat and a chair and a thing. You can just do it on the subway. You can do it in the car, sitting at a traffic light. And then, these kinds of lessons you can do, do them while you're teaching them, right? I mean, modeling is not a part of the method, but honestly, if you need it, do it, Good. Okay. Any questions so far?
There is a question in the chat from
Yep.
Carla. What is the best posture for this exercise in the classroom? On the floor or stand up or in the chair?
This is, well, on the floor, no, because you're constrained, right, by the floor. So this is a good sitting lesson or standing, right? It's a good question. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is also a chair lesson. Again, I'm picking lessons that are things that are easy to do and uncomplicated to do in the context of the studio or the clinical office. So I want you to come to the front of your chair with your feet on the floor and put one hand, and I don't care whether it's right or left, on the lower back and the other hand on top of your head. Now, if your hands, you can, how you're on your back, whether you have your palm forward or back, just as long as it's comfortable. And I'd like you just to begin to round your back. So round your lower spine into your hand. So the head is still up. So it's right now, that's just the only thing that's moving is the lower back. And the hand on the head is just to give you some information about what the other end of the spine is doing. So you're rounding and then you're rolling forward and arching. Right? So as you notice, right, that you get a little shorter as you round and you get a little taller as you arch. And do this a few more times. Again, watching your breathing. How easy is it? So what you're actually doing, shift your attention to what you're doing at pelvis level. If your hand gets tired up here, you can take it away and just round. But think about what's happening on your seat and feel that you're actually rolling back on your sits bones, right, as you round, and then bringing your belly forward. Right? So the movement is up and down as you're rounding and arching just a little bit. Good. So you're not going forward and back, you're really just up and down. Good. And let that go. And tune into your breath. And now just put your hand on your head. And what I want you to do is think about rounding from the top. So you're bringing your chin down and you're letting the upper part of the spine round and lengthen. And notice as you do this, whether in fact the bottom, the pelvis, is also rolling backwards and up. All right. So, but the tension is a little bit enfolding here, but in order to do that, you still need to be rocking with your pelvis backwards so that it's a rounding and a rolling. So if you're not sure what your pelvis is doing, put a hand in the back and make sure that you're actually rounding into at the same time. Good. And let it go and rest a minute. Just sit back in the chair. And again, notice any changes, the way you're breathing. And now if you need the hand on the back, then what I want you to do is think about, instead of thinking about rounding, rolling forward on your pelvis and arching, and so that the chin goes up. And instead of folding and rounding, you're now just starting in neutral and bringing your pelvis forward, letting your belly hang as you bring your chin up. So again, you're lengthening through the hole instead of rounding. And then come back to neutral. So the movement of the head is really driven by the fact that you're rocking forward on your pelvis so that you're arching a little bit in the back. That's it. so that it's a fluid movement. It's not that you really need to look up, it's just that everything gets a little longer in through the front. And let it go. So what we're doing is we're actually trying to connect from the head through to the pelvis, right? Through the whole thing, so that as you round, things get a little shorter and then you lengthen. So now, if it's helpful to have your hand in the lower back, then put it there. Meanwhile, bring your hand on your head. And what I'd like you to do is round as you bring your head back and then forward. So this is the opposite. So you're rounding in the pelvis is rolling backwards, but you're actually bringing your head back. So you're not bringing your head, rounding your head like you did before. You're actually elongating in the upper spine and then coming back to neutral. Right? So I'm rounding with my pelvis, I'm rolling backwards as I'm kind of bringing my head just a little bit back, and then I come back to neutral and the head comes back in alignment. That's it. Good. And let it go and rest. So we've got two different configurations going. One is the lengthening through the hole, right, and folding, and now we're parsing it differently. So as you round, you're elongating, right? So just get a sense of what that does in the way you're sitting, the movement of the rib cage. And this is a lesson going to the question somebody had earlier that can be done on the floor with your feet standing, your knees bent. So the bringing the lower back towards the floor and arching, and then letting the head move either with the action or against the action, right? So let's fill in that last part and just start by rounding your pelvis, bringing your belly forward, and just pick up that movement again. So you're getting a little longer. And this time, as you come longer, you want to bring your head down. So it's before we were doing this, and now you want to be rocking forward and bringing that. So it's a very different movement, and you need to kind of think about, at least I do, think about where I'm going, right? So as I'm rocking my pelvis forward, I'm also rounding, which means that I'm bringing the belly button. Where am I going? Yeah. And just play with it. And let that go. And now just roll your pelvis and see whether just the act of rocking your pelvis forward and back has changed. Again, so it's an up and down movement, not a forward and back movement so much. So the movement is really in the in the pelvis. And then take a minute to stand up. And walk around a minute. And feel how you feel on your feet. Maybe even make some noises, vocalize a little bit. And let it go and come back and sit down. Any comments, thoughts?
There's a
Changes?
comment from the chat. I think it's from
Mhm.
Edie. I appreciated the awareness of the complementary actions of the pelvis and the shoulders/head.
Good.
I had a question.
Yep.
I noticed I happen to practice a lot of yoga, so for me the movements of the pelvis it reminded me of cat cow, and so my
Mhm.
breath automatically started to coordinate with my movements. But I
Mhm.
didn't have that experience with the shoulder and head movement. Is it ideal to coordinate the breath with the movement, or does it matter? Because it
It
won't come
doesn't
naturally
matter.
to
It
me.
will find its own rhythm,
Okay.
right? I mean, this is absolutely, I mean, this is the because of, the pelvic movement is so attached to the movement of the diaphragm that it's easy to coordinate with that way. But then the question is, when you were going in opposition, right? Instead of rounding, you were rounding and extending. What happens to the breath then, right? Right? And again, that part is a little bit easier done when you're lying on the floor than in a chair, but it can be done, right? So did your breath pattern change when I had you go in opposition?
It stayed, whereas anything where the pelvis was kind of moving backwards, I would exhale, and forwards I would inhale. That's
Okay.
how that it for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would
So
be different for any person. That's why I'm
right,
asking.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, breathing is one of those things that is hard to teach. And then there's the belly in, the belly up. Are you squeezing? Are you pushing? Are you shoving? And it's so highly individual and task dependent that, I mean, we breathe depending on what we need to be doing. And, therapeutically, this is one of the times when I like to push it, to turn it on its head and do have people try to do the opposite, because they may suddenly find things that they didn't really realize were happening, or, actually having them, exhale while they're moving their belly in and out, right? So one of the applications of the Feldenkrais principles, right, is to, to cause the constraint of the constant, in this case, the airflow or the voicing, while you're, just wiggling your belly, or you're wiggling your shoulders, whatever needs to happen, right? And those are the constraints that we use. Any other questions? No, good. Okay. So, yeah, you guys, my email is marina.gilman@gmail.com. I'm happy to, if you have any questions or concerns or insight or whatever, please, reach out to me, and Edie certainly knows how to find me. And I hope this has been, helpful in giving you some insight into what the method can be. There are lots of Feldenkrais, pure Feldenkrais lessons available online for, I think some of them are free. People post things, and you can go under Feldenkrais or reach out to me, and I can give you some links to lessons that are available. There are Feldenkrais practitioners all over. And it's but again, what I've tried to do today is just to give you the basic outline of what this method can do, and in broad, just talk about the principles behind it that we can easily bring into the context of our, of our practice. So I hope that was helpful for you all.
Thank you so much. Let's give Marina Gilman a round of applause. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here. That was
Thank
really,
you.
really
Thank you.
wonderful.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. All right, everyone, that concludes our meeting for the day. And we will be posting the video to our YouTube channel, so you can revisit there. You can rewatch and share with friends and colleagues. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us, especially those who came from beyond Alabama, including our wonderful guest speaker. So we're so thankful to be here and to have the opportunity to learn and practice and to actually physicalize, embody some of these principles. It was really wonderful. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.